afternoon, everyone.
Is based on that. And secondly, I have sources that told me about
that you think only people from Great Britain or Australia would speak English is so insulting to millions of hardworking immigrants who do speak English from all over the world. Jim, have you honestly never met an immigrant from another country who speaks English outside of Great Britain and Australia? Is that your personal experience?
Of course there are people who come
But that's not what you said, and it shows your cosmopolitan bias. And I just want to say,
sounds like you're trying to engineer the racial and ethnic flow of people into this country.
Jim, that is one of the most outrageous, insulting, ignorant, and foolish things you've ever said. And for you, that's still a really the notion that you think that this is a racist bill is so wrong and so insulting. Jim, the reality is that the foreign-born population into our country has quadrupled since 1970. That's a fact. It's been mostly driven by green card policy. Now, this bill allows for immediate nuclear family members to come into the country, much as they would today, and then it adds an additional points-based system.
Ways do obtain a green card at some point. They do it through.
Medvedev, the Prime Minister, has weighed in on the President's signing of the sanctions, saying that this proves that the Trump administration is, quote, utterly powerless and ends hopes for better ties. What's the White House response?
Look, this morning the President signed the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. The President favors tough measures to punish and deter the bad behavior of the rogue regimes in Iran and North Korea. And he also sent a clear signal that we won't tolerate interference in our democratic process by Russia. The bill was improved, but Congress has encroached on the power of the presidency, and he signed it in the interest of national unity. We've been very clear that we support tough sanctions on all three of those countries. We continue to do so, and that has certainly not changed, and I think that was reflected in the statements today.
One of the finer aspects of the bill and the findings, it stated that Russia did, in fact, try to interfere in the U.S. election. In the President's statement on the signing statement, he did not quibble with that. Is that an indication that he does accept the finding that Russia interfered in our election?
The President's already said that himself directly at the press conference in Poland.
Actors
may have been involved as well, but he doesn't dispute the fact that Russia was, and he said that in Poland at the press conference that I believe you were present for.
Law enforcement officials in cities work with us.
The President, in signing this sanctions bill today, issued a signing statement, and in that signing statement, he said that the bill is significantly flawed. He said that there are provisions in this bill that are clearly unconstitutional. Why would he sign this bill if he felt so strongly that this bill it inhibits his ability to act as the commander-in-chief and to carry out his duties as president?
I think I spoke on this already, but primarily because the President favors tough measures to punish and deter the bad behavior of the rogue regimes in Iran and North Korea, and he also sent a clear signal that we won't tolerate interference in our democratic process by Russia. I also said that he signed it in the interest of national unity, and again in support of there's no question that there isn't support for the principles of the bill. It's maybe just some of the process pieces. Steve.
Will the administration continue making cost-sharing payments or not?
Well, one of the countries that views the US as its major threat is Turkey. This comes amid a row between the two NATO allies. The Pentagon recently slammed Ankara's decision to buy a Russian air defense system rather than opting for NATO technology. Washington says the Russian equipment could be incompatible with other systems used by the alliance.
Generally speaking, it's a good idea for allies to buy interoperable equipment. With any ally, with any partner with whom we interoperate, we want them to buy things and invest in things that will further invest in our alliance.
Well, Russia's S-400 surface-to-air system is designed to shoot down enemy missiles. It can be ready within 3 minutes and has a maximum altitude of around 30 kilometres, with a range of 400. Well, Turkey says it had tried to purchase similar systems from Washington, but the US refused, and that's why Ankara switched business partners.
Why should this be a concern? Each country should take certain measures to ensure its security. Whichever side can ensure these measures, it takes the necessary steps. How many times have we talked with America, but it did not work out? So like it or not, we began to make plans about the S-400. Our interested departments are negotiating, and this step will be taken.
Well, another thorn in US-Turkey relations is the Turkish media's attacks on US Special Envoy Brett McGurk. He's being criticised for promoting the military partnership between America and the Syrian Kurds, something Ankara has repeatedly condemned. Turkish relations expert Hüseyin Bagci told us the recent Turkish-American confrontation signifies a new stage in the NATO allies' ties.
This will create, definitely in the long run, a big confrontation between Turkey and the United States of America. The problem for Turkey is that Turkey is one of the most important military allies of NATO, and the second biggest army is still in Turkey after the United States of America. And I think Tayyip Erdogan's policy is now trying to play Russia versus the United States of America, and we call it the balance of power policy. Tayyip Erdogan's attitude towards America and American policies will be not as usual as before.
Demanded the downsizing of U.S. embassy staff within its borders in retaliation to new U.S. sanctions. How will the alleged Russian interference in Trump's election win dictate the president's next move?
Countdown to vacating embassy staff. Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered a cut to hundreds of U.S. embassy and consular workers in Russia. The U.S. government will have to downsize its diplomatic staff in Russia by September the 1st. This represents the Russian government's retaliation to expected U.S. sanctions on Moscow. The sanctions bill is overwhelmingly supported by Congress and will halt Russian trade, cold exchange and people-to-people exchanges with the U.S.
We are just seeing a rise in anti-Russian hysteria. They are using Russophobia for internal political struggles. At some moment we will need to respond, because it's impossible to endlessly tolerate this kind of insolence towards our country.
The bill passed following an initial downsizing of Russia's diplomatic staff and asset confiscation in the U.S. during Obama's administration. The U.S. action is aimed at punishing Russia for alleged interference in the 2016 U.S. election, allegations Russia has denied.
A better relationship, the lifting of sanctions, will require Russia to reverse the actions that caused sanctions to be imposed in the first place.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the third time.
The sanctions bill blames Putin's administration for interference in Ukraine and Syria. Trump's administration has been compelled to engage in this tit-for-tat game with Russia. Critics say that Trump lifting these sanctions would prove that he was in debt to Russia for their help during the 2016 U.S. elections.
So, has souring ties between Russia and the U.S. crossed the Rubicon, gone to a point of no return? Let's loop in our panelists. Join us from Singapore. We have from Russia originally Alexander Lukin, the Vice President of the Diplomatic Academy of Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Welcome, sir. And also in Washington, D.C., we invited Barry Pavel, who is a former special assistant to former U.S. President Barack Obama and a senior director for defense policy and strategy on the U.S. National Security Council staff. Gentlemen, welcome to both of you. I want to ask you, Mr. Pavel, what do you make of President Trump's apparent silence so far toward the possible bill against Russia and, of course, Russia's retaliation so far?
Well, I think more broadly, his general silence compared to his lack of silence on other issues, in particular on the Twitter platform, is nothing short of baffling to most observers in Washington and probably around the world. It's really hard to understand. On one hand, you could make an argument that it's strategic. In other words, he lets, like other presidents, he lets his advisors, other senior officials play the bad guy, and then he gets to play, in some ways, the good guy and maybe close a deal on new arrangements in the future. But in general, it's baffling, and there's no end to the speculation and curiosity of this riddle of why President Trump, who is so vociferous on every other issue, including with China, is completely silent on this question of Russia's actions in the election and in Ukraine.
Mr. Lukin, though, the president in the U.S. still have the power to veto the bill. Of course, we see a majority of both of the House of Representatives and also the Senate have already approved it. So he's probably have to go through his really not too much political capital in order to do that. Do you think the Russian side would call on the U.S. president to do so, to veto the bill?
Well, first of all, I'm not a psychologist, I'm a political scientist, so I'm not sure what American president is going to do.
Okay,
and,
fair enough.
Secondly, Russia is not going to ask for anything because we are not dealing with personalities, we are dealing with a country. The president is representing a country, the Congress also represents the country, so whatever they do, we are going to deal with that. The thing is that, but as a political scientist, I can say that it's useless to veto the bill because you need 2/3 of the Congress to overrun it, and they have enough votes. So it's if he vetoes the bill politically, it would be just it will be overrun. It will be a humiliation for him, and there is no use. So I don't think that he's going to do it.
Many people are curious whether this is a real fight back by President Putin against the U.S. to reduce the number of the embassy staff inside Russia and also take away 2 properties for diplomatic uses by the United States in Russia, or actually it's just one of those gestures Russia would make to show to the United States what Russia would do. Mr. Lukin, what is exactly your interpretation? Real fight back or just a gesture?